A little bit about me. As you can tell, I'm from the U.S. in particular. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. I'm a third generation, student of the spiritual sciences and the arts. My great-grandfather, he was what we call a mystic. He was involved in certain groups such as the Rosicrucians and others. But luckily, by the time it came to me, he made sure that I understood that I did not need the secret initiation, the oaths, the myths, or the lies, but all I needed was my birthright. So, yeah, luckily, he was able to teach me that which he knew which was relevant and tell me to discard that which wasn't relevant. Of course, it went to my grandfather and my father. So this is what started my journey. And initially, my journey was rough because you have to understand the context of where I'm coming from. In the city of Detroit, I'm sure you've read the headlines, there's a lot of transition going on. And one of the biggest issues in the city of Detroit is the condition of the people. And the condition of the people varies. You have those that are very aware of what's going on, but you have too many people that are not aware of what's going on. And so as I grew and developed, I began to become more interested in how do I use this applied spiritual science to motivate and to stimulate and to create new modes of existence in my community. So, of course, the best physician first experiments on himself. So I decided to investigate the alternate experience, as you will, under the guidance of my teacher, which I give credit and honor to, Ahati Kalindi. He served me in many different ways and showed me many different things. One of which was the path of sacred plants and how they can open up so many things for us. So my first experience, I'm going to speed up. My first experience was great. As we all know, our first experience is extremely personal. You want to go out and tell the world. And my second experience was even more. But if you know anything about Ahati Kalindi, he pushes the envelope and he requires the same for his students. And so as a result, I began to consider and utilize the higher doses. And we got into the higher doses, one of the first things I began to notice is that I'm not here by myself. Whatever realm I'm in, I will always sense some type of presence. Sometimes it would be benevolent, sometimes it would be malevolent, excuse my language. And the only way I can verify this was through talking with other individuals. So part of my growth and development, beyond taking a personal experience, I began to open up my space to share this experience with other people. And as I began to take notes, every single one of them began to note, yeah, there is something else in that realm, which piqued my interest more. I'm a student of psychology and philosophy. Immediately I went to Carl Jung's idea of archetypes. And it said archetypes. And it was very interesting because to be rooted in the Western sense of psychology, he touched on very high spiritual aspects. The idea of an archetype being a living thought, in essence, which motivates human behavior, whether through symbols, music, pictures, dance, or any other sensory thing. That started my wheel spinning. As I continued to cross-compare notes, I went to the Gnostic tradition. And in the Gnostic tradition, they talked about the demiurge and those trickster spirits and those benevolent spirits, those that would try to influence human thought and behavior. Continue studying on. I studied the condition or the tradition of the devas, and in the Hinduist tradition, in which these devas were also benevolent spirits, but you also had evil spirits. In the Islamic tradition, they talk about the jinn and how the jinn can be good or bad. So I kept seeing this strain of references to these other beings that exist in other realms and how they impact human behavior. And so as I began to go deeper and deeper and take higher and higher doses, I decided that I wanted to, one, try to verify that and then try to engage them and see what happens. Okay? So just a little background of why this is important to me. My community, my African, my Black, my African global diasporic community suffers from different calamities. Most of these calamities, though, as you look at them through study and research, comes from a historical, let's just say, disconnection from the root mother culture. And I realized the importance of ethnogens in bringing out this root mother culture. When we think about things like issues of economic security or political function, you have to understand that these things are motivated by one's connection to their culture and their ancestors. Next slide. The code. One of the things I realized that was going on in my community and the world in general is we're in the spiritual dark ages. Okay? Whether we know it or not, I'm sure we all know it. We're in the right place to know that. We're in the spiritual dark ages, ones in which most people rely on a add water type of approach to spirituality. They go to their local clergy or religious head and they expect them to answer everything. So we're living in the spiritual dark ages. One of the things I noticed in my community is that the spiritual dark ages is extremely deep rooted. Because once again, our mother culture, our ways of talk, our ways of act, dress, mores, our ways of culture, food, religion, our connection with the divine has been severed. And in place of that has been what we've been given. As a result, there's no connection to anything that matters beyond appeasing that mystery God. Not doing right for the sake of doing right, but doing sake for not going to hell. Not doing good for the sake of doing good, but doing good for the sake of avoiding the wrath of some red-haired demon god in the ground. And that is a bad situation, because when you're motivated not to do something or to do something out of fear, you're never going to advance. You're just going to sustain yourself. Okay, so the first thing I understood was the spiritual dark ages. Second thing was the cultural assimilation. Oddly enough, when the issue of entheogens and psychedelics comes up into my community, you'll be amazed at how conservative many people are. They accuse you of, oh, you're on that hippie stuff. You know, you're on that crazy stuff. You know, you're going to open a porthole and Satan's going to get you. You know those are drugs. You're going to go. And all of these different notions. So it's extremely hard nut to crack in the black community. And a lot of it has to do with cultural assimilation. That prompted me as well to go on travels. Once again with my teacher, Ahati Kalindi. And as we traveled to several different parts of Africa and dealt with traditional peoples, what we found out was that the priesthood knew about these plants. The everyday people didn't. And the priesthood was sworn to secrecy. And that was an issue, because one of the things we realized, and all of us realized, is this can't be kept a secret anymore, and that we need to utilize it in a responsible, structured way to help elevate the situation. Okay? So the need, cracking open the concrete mind. My thesis is based on the idea that through purposeful entering into these novel states of consciousness, we can create a new human archetype. We can create a new design of what it is to exist. And currently right now, if we have friends or relatives that may have experienced this, too often we hear the novelty experience. Yeah, I took this particular medicine and I went roller skating. Or I took this medicine and I, ran down the street naked, and, you playing with a very powerful medicine. And one of the things I want us to be sure about is the need to create a new archetype. And I'm thoroughly convinced that with higher doses, you can go in and we can create a new form, a new operating system of what we call humanity. Okay? And this hopefully will usher the awakening. In the United States, let's talk about 1950s. If you take your average American, they were very conservative. They were very just pro-war, pro-everything that was not good today. Pro-environmental destruction, pro-war, pro-everything. But their sons and daughters began to experiment with certain plants. And by 1970s, we saw these sons of these individuals sticking flowers in the rifles of guns. We saw their daughters burning bars. We saw draft cards being burnt. We saw people standing in front of tanks. We saw the very basic notion of American culture being challenged by the children of those that created American culture. And so we realized the importance of utilizing these plants to create the resistance against what? Spiritual ignorance. And my appeal to everybody today is, how do we utilize these novel states of consciousness in a righteous, ritualistic, traditional way to stimulate people? Because my fear is that as this understanding becomes more widespread, it's going to become a novelty. And as it becomes a novelty, it's going to play right into the hands of the same forces that stopped the movement back in the 60s. Those people who wish to discredit the movement by saying it's a it's a fad, it's people who are acting foolish, it's people who are acting irresponsible, and it can cause horrible things. So it's very important for us that are what I call psychonauts, that we figure out a ritualistic and purposeful expression, and that we no longer limit it to the personal experience, but we find purposeful ways to share it with community. And I'm assuming that it's several of us in the room who figured out how to share it with a larger community. One of the things we have to do is create this resistance. Whether we talk about the Religious Laws Act and the right for people to utilize those sacraments, which take them to a higher spiritual level, that's something we need to fight for. I guess our first major entheogenic movement has started it's through MDMA or through the marijuana, cannabis movement. So the momentum is growing, and it's very important that those of us who understand the importance of this medicine resist the notions of industry, resist the notions of politics as they attempt to converge and make it a profit-making thing. Okay? The rebirth. This led me to the rebirth of not only human, but in particular my people. I want to see my people rebirth, and how do we do that is we reconnect them through these ancestral spirits. So when I talk about creating another archetype of human consciousness, anything goes. Now, how many of us would really, in our experiences, how many of us have sensed some type of, I guess, presence on that other side? Okay? And we all have. How many of us could conceive that this presence can be sometimes malevolent or sometimes benevolent? Now, how many of us could possibly conceive that there's a chance that we can, through technology, advanced spiritual technology, utilize, either ward off these negative influences or bring on these positive influences for the betterment of humanity? I think we all can agree to that. So the question I'm posing to everybody is, how do we go about that? How do we go about creating purposeful, ritualistic experiences to change the human archetype, as opposed to keeping it insular, as opposed to keeping it a personal thing? How do we make it a human thing? One of the things that most impacted me was my cousin, who was a crack addict for 3 years straight. Stolen everything, lost all his teeth, and he was on the verge of death. And this is the final point in which I had to come out my stage, my shell, and say, I'm going to share this with my cousin. And in my doubtful thinking, I said, this couldn't be like Eboka. I gave him an experience. I allowed him to participate with the psilocybin, 7 grams one night. He's been clean for the last 9 months, cold turkey. So, just like the Ebokas that we know of, or the ibogaine that clinical scientists know of, how can we utilize this to improve the human condition? We need to become the scientists, because what will happen is this will be hijacked, and this wonderful medicine will be locked up in the medicine cabinet for another couple hundred years. Okay? There are 2 paths of experience: self-discovery, acquaintance, and knowledge of self. Of course, for most people, the first stage is acquaintance with self and self-discovery, understanding who we are in our sacred nature, trying to reconnect who we are, heal our old wounds, and stimulate growth and development for ourselves. But then there's a deeper path, and this is something that I've challenged everybody who's come to me and wanted to experience this. I said, look, if you get something out of this experience, I want you to consider taking a shamanic path, which we know is a lot harder. Okay? This glyph right here, I love this glyph because it helps me get a visual representation. See, this is, to me, the personal experience. This is when you're growing. You see, as the glyphs grow, you get higher titles and higher understandings of who you are. But when you cross this barrier and you step into the realm of Haru, the shaman, now you're dealing with the realm of divine entities. And through utilizing these plants, you become that shaman. And sometimes being the shaman isn't fun. It's no longer the bliss, the happiness, and the joy. Sometimes it's healing wounds. It's staying up all night, crying for some stranger that you didn't know about until the night. Sometimes it's reconsidering the words that you told a family member and healing them in the dream state. And this is what we need to be about, the ancient approach to healing people. See, we're in a warfare, and one is seen and one is unseen. And whether we know it or not, this is the matrix. And we have to find a way to go into the matrix. We have to find a way to engage those people that oppose human growth and development. And we have to find a way to vanquish them. I think we are totally convinced. I think we have everything we need. For those of us who've already walked the path of self-discovery, I want you to consider the acquaintance, the deeper aspect, the higher doses, the stepping outside of the personal self, the looking and sensing, almost like the movie The Sixth Sense. I see dead people. So let's take it there. Let's go there. Because this is the steps to design a human architect. I believe that those people who rule society from the top, whether we believe in a conspiracy theory of Illuminati and things of this nature, which I believe a lot of it is true, I believe they utilize these plants on the other realm to influence world events. Now, I'm glad I can say this in this room so I won't sound crazy. Anywhere else, they'll laugh at me. But I'm convinced somewhere there's a 33 White Lodge Mason that is utilizing these things and influencing people's behavior. I'm convinced that there's some high-level individuals who do ritualistic, spiritual communications to influence human trends. On the social technological world, we heard of memes, right? How things become popular instant on both coasts of the country for no apparent reason. Okay? This is a perfect example of how these entities interfere. What do we need? We need a willingness to grow. One of the things we really need to work on is the maturity. Too often people take our message as a joke, as a flan, as a game, as nothing to be taken seriously. We need to really let them know how mature we really are about this. And some people don't understand when we mention psychedelics and when we mention going into the novel states of consciousness, people come with an immaturity. So the more ritualistic, the more prepared we are, the more versed we are, the more we can stimulate people to approach this thing in a mature sense. And they'll take it harder. The second thing is study. Very important that we study, and that's why I love this conference, because this represents people who actually take it beyond the novelty state. We actually want to read the research. We actually want to do the experiments. We actually want to connect with those people who are doing this. So these three things are very important, but what's not stated here is the importance of ritual. When I traditionally try to go, and I'm closing shortly because my time is running out, I like to get triple darkness. I want it to be black. I don't want to see anything. I don't want to hear anything. And I definitely want to be stimulated by electronic noise. Okay, that's the first step. The second step is pre-preparation. You know, pre-preparation. Getting your spirit in a position where you're ready to receive this wisdom. And then the third thing I think is very important, and we all know this, is the ritualistic fasting. And these are just basic three elements that we all are familiar with. But what other elements can we include to make this more powerful? Is it an MAO inhibitor? Could it be the use of urine therapy? Could it be the use of finding sister plants to match up to create another effect? What are the potentialities? How can we change the human archetype? Once again, I'm going to close with this. These are the realms that I've experienced. The silly, mischievous realm, right? Then we go to the woodsy realm where we interact with those nature spirits. Then we go into the DNA helix, you know, when we understand the creation and origin of life. Oftentimes we go into the ancient. How many times have I know I personally experienced the healing, where they're going inside your body and healing you, and finally when you're one with all. And this represents the higher dose. So how do we create another human archetype? I think we do it by going into those novel states of consciousness. I don't think protesting is going to change much. It's going to help. It's going to voice our discipline, our disappointment. I don't think any other of these social movements that we try can do what this medicine is going to do. So I just encourage everybody to try their best to let's figure out how we can push the envelope. How can we responsibly bring people into this fold? How can we take that person who's totally outside and has no understanding of what we're talking about and slowly bring them to this understanding? And then finally, how do we recognize those people who just may never be ready? Not every acorn will become a tree, and we need to realize that. But those acorns that will become trees, how do we nurture them? And how do we help them to help us to create a bigger movement so we can help heal humanity? Finally, you can find the ocean in the drop. You can find the answers to the human problems within yourself and within yourself, you can find the answer to the human problems. I'm sorry I'm a little bit off because I've been traveling all day and all night. I'd love to share more with you, but I thank you for your audience. I thank you for your attentiveness, and I look forward to interacting with more of you. But let's create a new human archetype. Let's break the old modalities. Let's question what we know, and let's step with a little more strength in it. No more being tepid, and I'm speaking to myself when I say this. So thank you very much for your attention.